Welcome, folks. All right. So, folks, now what we are going to do is we are going to look at this entire series as a whole. And the question on the table is, what are you getting from this series? And we're going to use the new kind of deep conversation format where you can talk at length. And what I'll be doing is that I'll be having a conversation with you, the purpose of which is to make sure that your perspective is clear to everybody, to me, and hopefully as a result to everybody, okay? So if you have comments, if you would like to talk, and I encourage you to do that, to talk about what you're getting from the series. You know, we have gone through many of these episodes, and this is a good time to kind of look back and say, okay, what have we been getting from this series? All right, go ahead and type exclamation mark or raise your hand in Zoom in order to share what you're getting. So it's going to be Evanique followed by Rogine. Evanique.
Yeah, so many things, but I think number one is how the Bible is used to explain human psychology and the way humans interact with each other. And I didn't get that until this series with Jordan Peterson. And I think I think I've shared this before, but at first his videos drove me crazy because I didn't see where he was going. But if you follow him and you really concentrate, you'll see he's using psychology to bring a new perspective on the Bible story, starting with the beginning of the universe and the order and the chaos, and how both are needed in how order and chaos are used to create something new. And it creates this whole new thing, but you need both because the chaos brings creativity and the order kind of brings the plan. So, and then another point is how we deal with our flaws and jealousy. And you can see that in the Cain and Abel stories, which, you just, as a Christian, you just kind of passed off as Cain's horrible, Abel, poor Abel. He dies early in the series, and that's it. Like, that's what you get. And then when Jordan Peterson broke that story down, he talked about how, like, the progression of Cain from getting to the point of just making a sacrifice that wasn't a full-on sacrifice to the point where he could kill Abel. And basically, he was saying that, Cain was just killing, like, at one point he says, Cain killing Abel is like an attack on God making human beings or making them, and murder is the ultimate act of, well, we shouldn't have been created. And so it's the antithesis of what God is. And then also too, on a more practical level, how we use how we, like, when we do something wrong, first we try to pass it off and hopefully that no one sees it, but then instead of repenting, which Cain could have done, he decides that he's going to not only kill Abel because he's jealous, and but he also hides the body. And so we hide, and instead of just saying, okay, we messed up, we're gonna move on and do better, we do the opposite. And so all throughout, has helped me to see where I do that. And it helped me to see myself in every single one of these Bible stories, the good, the bad, and you're confronted with yourself. And what do you do with that is the question. And that's the most important thing. And then I'll shut up. The most important thing is, what are you going to do with that knowledge? How are you going to improve your life? If you're going to improve your life, what are you going to do going forward? It's not about dwelling in the past and focusing on what a bad person you've been, or, all these negative qualities. It's like, okay, what are you going to do now? What are you going to do going forward? Because now every day brings a new opportunity to change and take responsibility and make yourself better. So that's what I got.
Let me go ahead and let me try to summarize it, because the thing is that you have a very different context because you're intimately familiar with Bible. Many people here, only some of the people are familiar, some of the people are not familiar. So actually your comments are far more, a relevant way of looking at Jordan Peterson. And what you're saying is that, so let me correct me if I'm wrong here. What you're saying is that, let's say the story like Cain and Abel, initially, when it is read in the typical tradition, it is just simply kind of, okay, this bad thing happened. This is a bad person. I'm sorry that this good person got hurt. So it is at that level. Whereas what Jordan Peterson is doing is that he's actually showing you kind of the psychology, deep human psychology behind that. And you can see yourself both as Cain and Abel, that these are the abilities and these are the tendencies that human beings as such have. And it is kind of throwing light on your own psychology of how it is working. And then that allows you to have a deeper understanding of yourself. And then you can see the same kind of issues, same kind of choices happening in your life on a much smaller scale, but it's the same kind of choices. Are you going to face your mistakes? Or are you not going to face your mistakes? That's a choice that we all face all the time. And what you're saying is that that is what Jordan Peterson has done for you, using the Bible stories, which you're already very familiar with as a base. Is that a fair way of summarizing what you're saying?
Yes, absolutely. And just to add one more thing too, is the more recent ones where it talks about trust and how we're foolish if we think we can't trust, that we don't trust people. We trust people all the time. But the importance of trusting yourself and knowing that, and this has been huge for me, knowing that you're going to be okay no matter if the person that you're trusting betrays your trust. Because not only that, if they betray your trust, then you see who they are. And I think Joe brought this up a little earlier, where he talks about when a person betrays your trust, what it does to them as an individual. So, I mean, and we have to look at ourselves as, where have been times where I've betrayed someone's trust, because I'm sure everybody's here done it at least once. And so what does it do to you as a person? And when you're betrayed, remember how that feels, because when you do it to someone else, it kind of has this thing where it also affects you. So yeah.
Absolutely. And the discussion last time on trust was just incredible. Just a number of points that everybody brought up. And that's, again, a very good testament to what he has done, is that by focusing on a point like that, it just brings up, trust in terms of what is its impact on the future is, impact of human relations as such, and what are the choices involved in trusting or versus non-trusting. So it was amazing. Thank you, Avanik. Next up is Rogine, Dave, Joe, and Kevin. Folks, I really want to hear what you're getting from this story, this series. So go ahead and type exclamation mark if you'd like to share. Rogine.
I had started approaching this as part of my effort to get a grasp on my personal values and idea of ethics. And with this, I was kind of, like he talks about, going out into the unknown. I thought Jordan Peterson, I didn't know much about him, really didn't have much to say to people like me. I'm not sure where I got that, but like the emphasis on young men. And I have a long, deep knowledge of the Bible and Christianity and the history of all that, which has led me to become an agnostic, because some of it is very hard to swallow. So I'm an atheist with respect to the common pedestrian Christian idea of God, but very much hoping to have values and spirituality. And Jordan Peterson's progression through this has helped me made me see that character is much more complex and not a bunch of simple rules, and that you don't know if God, whatever that means, is going to speak to you, or even maybe is speaking to you about a purpose. And happiness is not the point, but being a good human being, that you don't know. You don't have to be a perfect person. You don't have to have a perfect past. You have to be trying in an increasingly sophisticated way. So, yeah.
Thank you, Regine. What I hear you say is that you're familiar with Bible, and you are an atheist. Your focus is on personal values and what how should you pursue values? What are the right values? And I do think that Jordan Peterson has done a very good job of making things at a universal, presenting these issues at a universal level, of a psychological level, where whether you are religious or not, whether you are a Christian or not, he's talking about something which is heart of the human experience, and he's presenting it as such. So I think one of the values of this series is that he is making the meaning of Bible apparent to people who are not familiar with Bible, or who have rejected part of the Bible or are not familiar, and he's doing it at a very deep level. So even if a person is familiar with the Bible, like Evanik was saying, they get value from it. And a person who is an atheist, they get value from it. So thank you, Regine. Next up
I would like to clarify, I'm an atheist with respect to the common oversimplified idea of God that my culture has handed me. I'm agnostic as to sort of what Jordan Peterson, the overall God thing, and he has pushed me toward I'm not so agnostic. I think there's a God. It just isn't the one I was taught in Sunday school or seminary or whatever. So,
well, thank you, Regine. The point is that the idea of kind of spiritualism, like when you look at, for example, Tao Te Ching, the way in which they think of God, or if you look at Spinoza's God, if you look at the God that founding fathers have, that's a very different conception of God. And that is kind of closer to nature. So it is a different conception. So what he's doing is that he's actually pointing to that. I mean, he's based his work on Carl Jung, and whose conception of God, I mean, it's more of what shall I say, Gnostic conception, which is very much connected to the Eastern view. So it is not the God of the standard tradition, but it is God nevertheless. It's a wider concept that many people have used. Thank you. Next up is going to be Dave, Joe, and Kevin, and followed by Eve. Dave.
Thanks, Shrikant. And this is something to talk about. And just thinking back, been at this about a year and a half now. Every week we've had a meetup on Jordan Peterson. So that's around 70 or so. And I'm just thinking that some of these videos are 2 hours long. So I'm thinking I've probably listened to about 100 hours of Jordan Peterson videos. To me, what first struck me about him, that he's a very charismatic speaker, and he's most of these, before a crowd. But also some of these are college lectures when he was a professor. And I'd like to make the statement that he's a very caring person. And to me, like these students, I mean, he could just be up there lecturing about A, B, C, and D and not care, but he's talking to them individually, saying about sacrifice. Okay, kids, you're here for 4 years of university. And if you study and play your cards right, and I've developed this thing about looking 5 years in the future, you use this tool if you want. This will make a big difference in your life. And as I say, to me, it's obvious he cares about these people. And he often reflects about his psychology patients, about how he's helped them. But so he's gone across the waterfront. Oh, and the other thing I would say, he's advertised as intellectual. He's very obviously a very smart man. And of course, I grew up in the Cold War, US versus Russia. And he's read Dostoevsky and these Russian authors.
Dave, let me address your first point, then you can go to the second point. The point that you're making is very, very deep. I mean, that's heart of what is his appeal. He's actually talking to young people, and he's showing them morality in a form. He's actually bringing all of the tradition and kind of wisdom, traditional wisdom, but packaging it in a way where it is accessible to them. He's actually speaking to them. So that is quite a feat in today's age, which tends to be very subjectivist, just go do what you feel like. Whereas this is saying, okay, let's look at what patterns are there in psychology and in life. And that's what he's teaching. Please go on, sir.
Yeah, and of course, Nietzsche was the other word I could come up with, but a Eastern author, the Soviet Union. But so he's talking about all these things, and I don't know how he got into the Bible, but speaking as a European, in America, I think there's more Bibles sold than any other book, and it's a big part of our culture. Even if you don't go to church or whatever, knowing these familiar expressions about the woman by the well, or the prodigal son, or the good Samaritan, that phrase brings up a story and a moral to the story, and it's thing we talk about in conversation. So I think, but he decided to go through the Bible, and he was raised a Christian, but as I was, but I don't think he's a practicing Christian anymore. But and I think I'm kind of following Eva Nick a little bit, that these are humans in the Bible. It's not about kings and princes, although they're in there, and about all the angels, this, that, and the other, but it's about human beings and their failings and their misfortunes and their cheating and their adultery and all this, that, and the other. And going through all this. So I think that's another part of it. And and it's funny because I think he also mentioned even in today's lecture that he's into Tao Te Ching, but to tie East and West together. And today I was very encouraged. A man brought up a question, and the questions have been marvelous. And I don't know if he was a Muslim, but he asked about the difference between Islam and Christianity. And apparently Jordan Peterson made the statement in the past that, well, the prophet was a warlord, so therefore he was evil, and Jesus was good, or whatever. But the questioning man brought up the point, well, all these stories are also in the Quran. It was traditions before literature, but so it was all vocal stories. So some of the names are slightly different because of pronunciation, whatever. But Jordan Peterson talked about, he's got a dozen books on his bookshelf he wants to get through, and several people have contacted him and he wants to interview them. That I don't want to get into politics, but we've got a problem in our country now, or in the world, of a big division between Islam and Christianity. And maybe Jordan Peterson can be a bridge. I mean, to me, that would be marvelous. That's one of the things could be a big change in our world. Like we've been studying the Tao Te Ching and talking about Eastern religion things. There's so much we need to learn about each other. And we're, as we say in our country, we're all in this together. and the life is suffering. But so anyways, to me, it's an interesting journey, and I'm fascinated by the guy, although I know he makes detours, and I guess maybe I do when I talk, but I'm glad I'm on this journey with all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dave. I just want to comment on one thing, the power of stories, which kind of everybody kind of talked about, because what he's showing is that he's actually taking the story. People just say, oh, story. But, to him, he's a Jungian, maps of meaning is how fundamental stories are. What stories are capturing are actually the way in which we look at our life, where we are going. And in some ways, those are fundamental pieces of looking at the world as a place of action. So he leverages stories and the power of stories dramatically. Thank you. Next up is going to be Joe, Kevin, and Eve. Joe.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm trying to wrap my head around because it covers so much, and I'm trying to cover the main points. So what I'm trying to do is kind of group in.
Sure. And what I'll
ways.
do is that we'll go back and forth on each of the groups. So you don't
Okay.
have to speak out the whole thing. Just go ahead.
So there's this idea of even the concepts that are derived from things like God the Father, and we've talked about these things in maps of meaning, the benevolent Father, or something along things like that. And then there's things that go underneath that. Certain, like you have a covenant with your father, and that that your father responds to sacrifice, and that there's this God the Father that can transcend space and time, and it judges and it forgives. There's all these major concepts that actually are derived from these archetypical figures. And I think that you could start to see how the stories evolve themselves. And that's where you're starting to really kind of see where maps of meaning kind of works into the Bible itself. So even if you come back to God the Son, the idea he dies and he's reborn. You have, and then a very good comment last week that we talked about was from Karl Poplar, is one of the most human things that we can do is allow our thoughts to die in order for us to survive. And that's kind of these concepts you start to see where human psychology and the fundamentals of the stories that he's telling are actually mapping one to one.
Wonderful. Can I comment on?
Please, yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I think this is a huge point, because instead of looking at the Bible stories at, okay, this is what the Bible says, what he's doing is that he's actually identifying patterns. Things like, okay, what do you need as a human being in order to do well? In order to do well, you have to think about the future, and you have to be willing to sacrifice in the present for the future. And how is that mapped onto the concept in Bible? You have to be willing to give up something that is precious to you, that was precious to you, because things have changed. You have to be willing to do that. And that is captured through that you have to let your son die. It's a dramatic, go ahead.
No, I that's one of the things that I find to be the most striking is the gradual level of the sacrifices that are actually increasing as the stories go on. It goes all the way to the point where then God becomes man and kills his only son. Like so that you start to see sacrifice all the way early on. I mean, with certain with offerings with Cain and Abel. This is the thing. I am sacrificing for you, God the Father. This is the archetype. Rejected, and then there's this idea of forgiveness and punishment. So these concepts that we come up with, and these laws, and how they even form our laws, and how they shape society and human thought, that even the idea of the spirit itself. Well, what is the spirit? what's the distinction between a spirit and a soul? You can kind of see all these things. It ties maps of meaning together with very sophisticated stories. And that's so you start to see these things. And then when it really starts to hit home, and the important part I find is where you start to see the things, and we've talked about it extensively before, is the elements of trust. And you see how these manifest themselves in everyday life. And he mentioned it today with I have to say, it was Dante, writing about it. There's another story, betrayal, the lowest forms of hell. You're next to the devil, that you're actually betraying somebody else. Why you're killing somebody else. When I was I remember this as a little kid, I asked, and I remember how old I was. I was 5. I said, is it worse to kill somebody, or is it worse to betray somebody? I asked my teacher. And my teacher actually said, I don't know, to her credit. And the truth is, they're both forms of murder. But again, what happens is you start to really understand where his psychology, his maps of meaning book, and chaos and order and everything that goes along with it, it actually plays itself out in these stories in the Bible.
Let me build on that.
Please, go ahead.
So, like, the way I'm seeing it is that there is a correspondence of 3 different things that he's doing all the time. He's showing you, the heart of the point, he captures it in psychological terms brilliantly in maps of meaning, and the general principles of psychology, mostly based on Carl Jung, but he captures the point there. And he has elaborated it, he can elaborate it by itself using maps of meaning, using Carl Jung's principles. Then he maps it to the Bible stories. So he connects that. And third, he maps it into how it actually manifests itself as a choice for you in day-to-day life. So you're going between actual decisions, psychological theories, and stories. So the stories is giving you an allegorical version of it. The maps of meaning is giving you kind of the literal version of it. And then you can apply it at a moral level when you're actually living. And that is scaled. It's like the stories are the most extreme. It's life and death issues, but there are equivalent of that, of a smaller choices that you face in your day-to-day life. So there is, I see it as being 3 things. Go ahead.
Yes, and it's also this idea of God as an ideal, and how that related to Nietzsche was really important. Like, it kind of hammers home as to the God is dead, and he goes on to say what is going to replace it, and if it is science, then we kind of have an issue. But this idea that where even maps, he talks about Freud and Jung throughout the series about how how God manifests itself in our dreams, but this ideal, this that we're striving for. And the reason that's so important is one of the things he hammered home in this series specifically is you have to know where you're aiming, and where you're aiming is an ideal. It's not to your rational thought. So that's a really big distinction that a lot of the existentialists have, like Kierkegaard and others, have actually talked about extensively. And he's saying this is how it plays out in our everyday life. So what it has connected for me is really at a very high level, the Jungian concepts, the Freudian concepts, even some of the distinctions between those two, and what these archetypical figures and how they actually have come to be, and here are the stories, and that they influence our everyday interactions, our laws that we live by, that we've come up with. There's reasons for them, and these are the reasons. So and the importance of, I'm just thinking out loud really quickly, the the importance of sacrifice as well. And then there was one other thing that I absolutely have taken from the series that I can't remember. But anyway, those are my main takeaways.
You can come back later when you
I
remember. Thank you.
appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you, Joe. Next up is going to be Kevin, followed by Eve. Kevin.
Yes, thank you, Frank. For me, surprisingly, I I like his book, Map of Meaning Beyond Order. I kind of read it. That's surprising. I think you guys talk deep so about Christianity. So it's beautiful, it's like David said, it could be a bridge, Eastern, Western, or secular and whoever have belief. For me, I use his pattern, the meaning, the map of meaning. And also chapter 8 is tell the truth, or at least don't lie. So I would say believe what you believe. At least don't hate or dislike others. I also quote from Avnik, Christianity and Islam, Jewish religions are all Abraham religion. For me, it's because religion issue or human issue. If one old song, the two format song, if I have a hammer, I'm looking for nails. Everywhere else it could be all nails. I also got another, if I have a hammer, I'm going like singing like a song, share with my brother, sister. So that's two different, that's depend on human being ourselves, how to use it. We may have our own map of meaning about God. All those lead along, I guess, speaks to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. I mean, I like the final comment about each of us have our own map of meaning about God. I mean, that's really the point that Joe was also making about the crucial importance of ideal. So this is a way of actually teasing out what we think is ideal. And that's really the point. And it's very interesting. Kevin, you are very familiar with Tao Te Ching. What parallels do you see between Tao Te Ching and this Bible series?
For me, that's another code I didn't, as human beings, we all look for something, achieve the same. So from Tao, that's one person, one and two. So like normally from like here from let's say Christianity or Islam, we have one perfect God. I would consider brother, sister, all the same God, but they still don't like each other. So we have no choice. When in the Tao, see, if you identify one God, you have to think about. You consider one is named as God. There's no such a perfect thing. You have to think on God or not doing thing. You doing something, it's like a hammer. That hammer help, but other going to look like you look others maybe no. Okay. So yeah, for Tao, I would say everything's flow and the balance and yin and yang. Yin and yang has yang. Like so we talk about let's say God, heaven and evil. Heaven maybe have some evil things too. In the evil has some beautiful things too. If let's see map to a human, if you look at people walk street, sleep on the street, they have big heart. That could be. It's their virtue, not less than what you are rich, live with a higher building.
Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. And this is something that I would like to explore at some point. We will do some, we did a meetup on Tao Te Ching. If folks, if you're not familiar with it, the meetup video that I have put out That's the best video on Dao De Jing that I found, because everybody is talking about what they're getting from Dao De Jing. So if you're not familiar with it, please consider watching that. It's on YouTube. Joe, if you could put the link, would appreciate that. Thank you. Next up is going to be Eve. And if anybody else wants to talk about what they're getting from the series, please go ahead and type exclamation mark. Eve.
Okay. Thank you for letting me join your two conference in the 3 days. I think this is very new to me. But I want to, I have so many things to say, but I don't want to take too many of your time. I probably want to say about why I like Jordan Peterson and questions regarding this story and my takeaway from both of that, from Jordan Peterson and this story. I am a Jordan Peterson fan. Like I had my own book club of Jordan Peterson's old books. And I don't agree that his fan is all young white men. Me being 49 Asian woman probably is, and all of our book club actually are mostly Asian women. So I don't think that he's only targeting at young man, white man part. Regarding the story, I have some keywords connected to it. First of all, I'm a female, but I consider myself somewhat a strong female, but not a feminist, old-fashioned feminist, probably. So I was very caught up by Jordan Peterson's debate with that. I forgot that hostess, her name, or somewhere like that. His explanation on the real feminist really caught me up. I think that was a very good balance of the left and right, or old-fashioned and new-fashioned. I don't know how to say that, but balance is the key word there. Also, regarding this story, I'm the second child, and I have given up, or I was forced to give up all my inheritance. So there's a long story there. So I was very interested in all the sibling stories in this Bible. And what caught me is that when Christianity taught everybody to love your brothers at most, but in these stories and in realities, we saw so many hatred and killings between families, especially siblings, and how to deal with that was a big question mark there. Thirdly, I'm a Christian. I consider myself a Christian, but I have been struggling with all the really right preaching among all the churches until I saw the Jordan Peterson's Old Testament series. That was an eye opener to me, and his explanation on these stories really gave me a very, very deep resonation, I should say. And I came from Canada. I came to Canada from China. So there is a lot of cultural conflicts or identity struggling. But Jordan Peterson's theory, especially his focus on Dostoevsky, and Nietzsche and Carl Jung, I think he has a very complicated combination of Eastern mind and Western mind. And he definitely understands the history of Russia and China like that. So that's why Jordan Peterson's theory really echoes with my thinking a lot. Regarding this story, I have discussed in our group earlier. I have several questions. One is, I'm so confused about God's choice.
Let's not do questions, Eve. We'll have time for questions later on.
Oh, okay.
Right now, everybody is just talking about what they have gotten from this entire series. Thank you. I really like the point about Jordan Peterson as being kind of part of the East, part of the West. I definitely through directly Dao De Jing as well as through Carl Jung. Carl Jung's ideas bring in a lot of the East in their own ways, and he's definitely a Jungian. So I think that's a very large source for him. And absolutely, it's not just for young men. I mean, the reason it appeals to young men is he provides morality. He talks about morality in ways which is accessible to people. And anybody who's seeking that, I think he speaks to. I've done Jordan Peterson meetups here in New York before he became famous, and it's a very wide group of people. Thank you. Next up is going to be Mike, the most challenging conversation. Go ahead, Mike.
This may not be that challenging because I don't really come to a conclusion in this.
That is the
And
hardest part, Mike.
there are some paradoxes in this story.
Mike, we're talking about what are you getting from this entire series, not about this story.
Okay, it's about what I'm getting from the entire series and paradoxes. From the entire series focused on this particular chapter.
Wonderful.
There was a situation in the Tower of Babel about building a stairway to heaven that resulted in essentially punishment. The latter has a similar set of paradoxes. Mr. Jacob didn't just go on a journey. He fled the country to prevent himself from being killed because he had betrayed his brother, he betrayed his father, and probably all the servants that were part of that group. And they talk about this dream, and the ladder blessed. He basically was told that he was going to get a major blessing and become great because out of this event, even though he sounds like in some respects he was a criminal. Now, this chapter about the Jacob's ladder occurred before his Jacob wrestling with God and getting rechristened the name Israel. So he wrestled with God and apparently had some degree of victory in it, even though it was a Pyrrhic victory. Thomas Aquinas compares the Jacob's ladder to the body of the church and to the concept of prayer, and states that first the angels going up this ladder are going up first and then coming down, implying that their prayers, the prayers are going up and then the answers are coming down, Aquinas thought of. And there's also a discussion in the scholarly parts of this thing of how many steps were in this ladder, how big was this ladder. And the consensus was that there's only 12 steps in this ladder. It's not a big ladder, but they're complicated steps.
So Mike, how do you see this as your review of the entire series?
That the entire series has elements of paradox in them. That they often pick the most flawed person to be the hero of the story, and then build a story about that.
Why do stories do that? Why do they pick the most flawed person?
Okay, I think I'm getting to it in a minute. Let me say a couple more things. The Jacob's ladder is talked about in Jung's Red Book before, and Jung is the patron saint of Peterson, and Jung also is the patron saint of having created the 12-step system for how to resurrect an addict. And I don't know why that's the case, but it's coincidence that it's a 12-step. There's a discussion of comparing the ladder to the spinal cord in Aquinas's literature. In later literature, there's a discussion comparing the ladder to DNA, which is divided into chromosomes, which is less than the 32 trillion pairs that we talk about, but and really only relatively few. This also got into this Jacob's Ladder thing also got into Da Vinci's notebook and into Escher's notebook. In fact, he has pictures of those. Both of them have pictures of what Jacob's Ladder looks like. And
Thank
it's
you.
not what
Thank you.
it's not
Thank
what
you,
we
Mike.
think it is.
Thank you, Mike, for giving an overview of Jacob's Ladder and connecting it to
Now,
where
I don't know that I've connected it yet. I've listed all these things as paradoxes.
Can you connect it within a minute?
No, this is my question. How are all these pieces connected? And why did they pick not necessarily the more perfect person or the in these things to build the church upon?
Wonderful.
And I'll yield the balance of my time.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Next up, I do want to hear from Pegor and Victor what you're getting from this series. Because generally, if you're putting a lot more into a series, you get a lot more out of it. So Pegor, would you like to talk about what you're getting from the series?
Yeah, definitely. Well, it's like what I'm getting specifically from this version of going through the series, especially that I'm sort of having to prepare something to talk about, is that I'm sort of understanding, or like I'm being sort of quote unquote forced to sort of look at the stories in this sort of pattern fashion, trying to figure out the connections or where things repeat each other. And it just it just shows you how well thought out you can say these stories are, and that they're not arbitrary or just some random collection of things put together. You know, they're definitely not the opiate of the masses, because no one's going to put that much work for some opium, you know. So like, so yeah, that's my take.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Pegor. Victor, what about you?
All right, so I'll start off by saying Peterson is actually a psychologist, and he's more into depth psychology, right? And he has written 3 books as of now, and it kind of relates to what we are talking about right now. So he first wrote Maps of Meaning, and after that he wrote 2 books that came out recently. And if we study everything, the core is the same thing. In Maps of Meaning, he talks a lot about order and chaos. So that's one thing I want to focus on, and especially this series. It's the Joe actually mentioned it. It's the definitions that we have for God and the ideal itself, and so especially that one. So I picked up a lot about chaos and order from Maps of Meaning, and in this series, we discussed a lot about chaos and order and all the old stories. And I kept on thinking, like, why we always discuss about this one, this order and chaos. And there is a particular depth that we can go and understand that, okay, there is chaos out there, and the order, there is order and there is chaos, and we are the one who will have to face it. But I was questioning myself, is that all? And then I started to see a particular thing. So order and chaos, it's not just external order and chaos, and it is also internal order and chaos. and we are at the center of it, and we ourselves have a lot of order and a lot of chaos in ourselves, and at the same time conscious and unconscious. The things that we observe ourselves are the only conscious level, and there are so many unconscious levels that we don't know that exist in us. So those are the things that he was trying to get at from these stories. So that particular point actually struck me really around like sixth or seventh video, that how to, when Abraham was told how to get out, so that's an idea of getting out externally, but at the same time internally too. And also, as Pegor pointed out, the U-shaped structure, U-shaped stories, every story has that U-shaped story. Why? Why that U-shaped story? Why there needs to be a fall and then going up? I was thinking about that, and it started to make sense that we will have to go, well, for us to go to a new place, the only place to go is to go inside, inside ourselves, and study ourselves, clean up ourselves, and only then we can go to a better place. So those are the things that started tying in together while studying order and chaos, and all these stories and the structure of the stories themselves. And second thing is about the idea of God. It never, see, our language and our understanding, everything depends on the definitions that we have, right? At least in at least that's how I understand it. And if you have low resolution definitions for the words, and we build on that low resolution definitions, and it may lead to a wrong place. And about the idea of God, it started to replace as the ideal itself. So that is one change that I started to notice. And as I was looking through that lens, things have become much more understandable. So those two things I want to say. So one thing is understanding order and chaos, and the second thing is emptying the current definition that I had for the idea of God, and replacing with the idea of ideal, and then filling in that definition through the stories.
Wow. Excellent. So what I'm going to do is that I think, Victor, you did a fantastic job of putting that. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to put on table a constellation of points that come from various people, and then ask people to comment on it if you want. So one part of it was the inner and outer. The stories are about outer, but many times they're actually pointing to the inner. And Peterson does a fantastic job of doing that translation, of looking at the story as a sequence of events that is taking place outside, and what does this mean internally? And what does this mean in terms of the nature of the psyche? Second point is that of the ideal, and that is huge. That is a theme that runs through everything. The third point is that of the U shape. And there I will bring in the point that Mike brought in, that, there are, why so many flawed characters? Okay, because it's really pointing to that there is the bottom that you have to go through in order to come out on the other side. And we face choices, tough choices. And it's very easy to actually, as Jordan Peterson points out, is to do the easy thing and not do the hard thing. So the U-shape ideal, the flawed, focus on the flawed nature, and then of course order and chaos is a giant theme that runs.